He crashed into the terrified little girl before anyone else could move. Without thinking, Giulia Bianchi lunged across the polished marble floor, her arms wrapping around the child, just as a speeding waiter carrying crystal glasses stumbled toward them. The tray slipped from Giulia's hands. Champagne exploded into the air like glittering rain. The ballroom fell silent. Golden droplets landed across the bride's custom-made white wedding gown. For 3 long seconds, nobody breathed. Then the bride screamed, "You stupid woman!" Her voice echoed through the magnificent ballroom, making every guest turn. "What have you done to my dress?" Giulia slowly stood, keeping the frightened little girl safely behind her. I'm so sorry, Signora. She ran in front of me. I didn't want her to get hurt. You touched me. I'm sorry." "I said you touched me." The little girl clung to Giulia's apron. "It wasn't her fault," the child whispered. The bride pointed a trembling finger toward Giulia. "Take that child away." The girl's mother rushed over, pulling her daughter into her arms without saying a word. Giulia's heart sank. Not one person defended her. The luxurious wedding reception overlooking the Italian countryside had welcomed nearly 400 guests. Politicians, celebrities, judges, wealthy entrepreneurs, and men whose names newspapers never dared to print filled every table. Yet every single one of them remained silent. The bride took one slow step closer, staring at Giulia from head to toe. "So this is what the hotel sends to serve important people?" Giulia lowered her eyes. "I'm truly sorry." The bride laughed loudly. "Sorry? Look at yourself." Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. The bride wasn't finished. "I asked for elegant staff. Instead, they hired." She paused dramatically before sneering. "A walking mountain." A few scattered laughs spread across the room. Giulia felt her cheeks burn. She had heard insults about her body her entire life. Too fat, too big, too curvy, too much. Nothing new, but hearing them in front of hundreds of strangers hurt differently. She whispered, "I'm sorry for ruining your evening." The bride stepped even closer. "You ruined the photographs. I'm sorry. You ruined my dress. I'm sorry. You ruined my wedding." Giulia swallowed hard. "I was only trying to save the little girl. I didn't ask you to be a hero." Another laugh erupted from one corner of the ballroom. Near the back of the room, one man stopped eating. He slowly placed his wine glass onto the table. His dark suit fit perfectly over a broad, muscular frame. Ink covered every visible inch of his neck before disappearing beneath the collar of his tailored jacket. Intricate black and gray tattoos climbed both hands, disappearing beneath his sleeves, where they continued across his chest, back, and arms. His name was Alessandro Moretti. Few people knew every detail of his business. Everyone respected him. Everyone feared him. His expression never changed. He simply watched. Beside him, one of his associates leaned closer. "Boss?" Alessandro raised one finger. "Not yet." Across the ballroom, the hotel manager rushed toward the bride. "Signora Isabella, please forgive us. We'll handle this immediately." "You'd better." The manager turned toward Giulia. "What happened?" Giulia answered quietly. "A child ran across the floor. I tried to protect her." The manager sighed. "You should have protected the dress." Giulia stared at him in disbelief. "The child could have been seriously injured." "I don't care." His words hit harder than the bride's insults. "I said, I don't care." The bride folded her arms. "Fire her." The manager hesitated only a second. "Giulia, no. I'm sorry. No, please." "You are dismissed." Tears gathered in Giulia's eyes. "I've worked here for 6 years. I'm sorry. My mother depends on this job. I'm sorry. I can pay for the dress. You can't. I'll work extra shifts." "There won't be any extra shifts." The bride smiled triumphantly. "Security." 2 large guards immediately started walking toward Giulia. At that exact moment, A chair quietly scraped across the marble floor. Every conversation stopped. Alessandro Moretti stood. One bodyguard instinctively reached for his jacket. Alessandro shook his head once. No. He began walking. Slow, calm, silent. Every step echoed across the ballroom. Guests instinctively moved aside without being asked. One senator whispered, "He's getting involved." Another guest muttered, "This won't end well." The bride frowned. "Who is that?" Her father suddenly looked nervous. "Isabella." "What? Please. What?" His voice became barely audible. "Don't say another word." She laughed. "Why?" He didn't answer. Alessandro stopped beside the shattered champagne glasses scattered across the floor. Without saying anything, he bent down. He picked up Giulia's fallen serving tray. Then he looked directly at her. For the first time since the humiliation began, someone looked at her with kindness instead of judgment. "What is your name?" Giulia blinked. "Giulia Bianchi. You protected the child." "Yes." "You knew you'd probably fall." "Yes." "You still did it." "Yes." Alessandro nodded slowly. "You made the correct decision." The bride scoffed loudly. "Excuse me?" Alessandro ignored her completely. Instead, he handed the tray back to Giulia. "You dropped this." She stared at him. "Thank you." His deep voice remained calm. "Never apologize for saving a child." The bride stepped forward. "Did you hear me? She destroyed my wedding." Still, he ignored her. That hurt her pride more than any insult could have. "I'm talking to you." Nothing. Guests started whispering. The bride became irritated. "I said I'm talking to you." Finally, Alessandro turned. His gray eyes settled on her. Calm, cold, unreadable. "Are you finished?" The bride frowned. "What?" I asked. His voice remained soft. "Are you finished humiliating someone who cannot answer back?" She laughed sarcastically. "She works for the hotel." "No." He looked toward Giulia. "She works honestly." Silence. He continued. "There is a difference." The bride folded her arms. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." "No, you don't. I watched everything. You saw her ruin my dress. I saw her save a child." The bride pointed toward Giulia. "Look at her." "I am." "She's completely unprofessional." "I disagree." "She's overweight." "And?" The bride blinked. "And?" Alessandro took one step closer. "So your complaint is her body." Several guests suddenly looked down, unable to meet his eyes. Nobody wanted to be associated with what was happening anymore. The bride realized the room was changing. The laughter had disappeared. Even those who had mocked Giulia moments earlier had become silent. If you're enjoying this story so far, take a second to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment telling us what you think Alessandro should do next. Your support helps this channel bring you more emotional stories like this. The bride lifted her chin. "I don't care what anyone thinks." Alessandro studied her for another moment. Then he smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that made powerful men nervous. "You will." He turned back toward Giulia. "Come with me." Giulia looked confused. I can't." "You can. I've just been fired. We'll discuss that. I don't belong over there. You belong wherever your dignity is respected." The entire ballroom watched as Alessandro gestured toward the VIP table. Not a single person dared to speak. Giulia froze where she stood, clutching the empty serving tray against her chest. I can't sit at your table." Alessandro looked at her calmly. "Why not? I work here." "You did. I've been fired. That changes your employment." He paused. "It doesn't change your worth." Giulia's eyes filled with tears again. Nobody had spoken to her like that in years. The bride let out a sharp laugh. "This is ridiculous." Alessandro didn't even look at her. He pulled out the empty chair beside him. Julia. She hesitated. I don't want to cause more trouble. The trouble already exists. His voice remained steady. The only question now is whether anyone has the courage to face it. Slowly, Julia walked toward the VIP table. The ballroom became so quiet that even the musicians stopped playing. As she reached the chair, Alessandro held it for her. Please. She sat down carefully. The bride slammed her glass onto the table. I will not tolerate this. Alessandro finally turned toward her. I noticed. You embarrassed me in front of my guests. No, he answered without raising his voice. You embarrassed yourself. A ripple of whispers spread through the room. The bride's face flushed with anger. My father owns half this city. Alessandro raised an eyebrow. Does he? Her father immediately stepped forward. Isabella, enough. No. Who does he think he is? The older man's face turned pale. You need to apologize. She stared at him in disbelief. To her? No. He swallowed hard. To him. The bride laughed loudly. I've never seen this man before. Her father whispered desperately. But I have. She frowned. So stop talking. She ignored him. I don't care who he is. Alessandro folded his hands on the table. That much is obvious. The groom, Marco Bellini, finally walked forward. Sir. Alessandro looked at him. Marco lowered his head respectfully. I apologize for what happened. Alessandro asked quietly. Are you apologizing because it was wrong? He paused. Or because you've recognized me? Marco couldn't answer. That silence said everything. Alessandro nodded once. I thought so. Julia looked from one face to another, completely confused. She leaned toward Alessandro and whispered, I don't understand. You will. The bride pointed at Julia. She doesn't belong among us. Julia slowly stood. If my presence is upsetting everyone, I'll leave. Alessandro gently raised a hand. No. She looked at him. You've spent enough of your life walking away because someone judged your appearance. His words struck something deep inside her. How did he know? She had spent years shrinking herself, apologizing before speaking, standing in corners, avoiding photographs, believing every cruel word people threw at her. Alessandro continued. Today, someone else can leave. The bride gasped. You can't tell me to leave my own wedding. He answered calmly. I haven't. She folded her arms. Then what are you saying? I'm saying respect isn't optional. The bride rolled her eyes. Oh, please. At another table, several businessmen quietly exchanged nervous glances. One of them whispered, She's finished. Another nodded. She has no idea. The bride noticed. What is everyone whispering about? Nobody answered. She turned toward one of the politicians. You know him? The politician avoided eye contact. Yes. Then tell me. I'd rather not. She became even angrier. This is absurd. Her father stepped closer to Alessandro. Signor Moretti. Giulia's eyes widened. Moretti. She knew that name. Every Italian had heard it, not from newspapers. From whispers, from stories, from powerful people lowering their voices whenever the name was mentioned. She slowly turned toward Alessandro. You are. He met her eyes. I'm Alessandro. Nothing more. He didn't need to say the rest. The ballroom already knew. The bride stared at her father. Who is he? Her father closed his eyes for a second. The man whose investment saved Marco's company 3 years ago. Silence. Marco looked down. Her father continued. The man every important businessman in this room respects. The bride forced a laugh. So? Her father almost shouted. So without him? He pointed toward the ballroom. This wedding wouldn't even exist. A wave of murmurs swept through the guests. The bride's confidence cracked for the first time. She looked at Marco. Is that true? Marco sighed heavily. Yes, you never told me. I didn't think it mattered. It matters now. Alessandro stood again. I came here because Marco invited me. He looked directly at the groom. I believed you were a man who valued people. Marco lowered his head. I've disappointed you. You disappointed yourself. The words landed like a hammer. Marco whispered, You're right. He turned toward Julia. I'm sorry. She gave him a small, sad smile. I wish you had spoken sooner. Marco couldn't argue. He knew she was right. The bride interrupted. This is all because of a waitress? Alessandro answered. No, this is because of character. She scoffed. You'd destroy a business over one mistake? No. He looked straight into her eyes. I'd end a partnership over repeated cruelty. The bride laughed nervously. You can't be serious. I'm always serious. He reached into his jacket. Every guest watched carefully. Instead of a weapon, he removed a slim folder. He handed it to Marco. Our future agreements. Marco accepted it with trembling hands. Alessandro continued. They're terminated. The groom's face turned white. The bride gasped. You can't. I already have. She turned toward the guests. Someone say something. Nobody moved. Several wealthy investors quietly stood up. One elderly businessman walked toward Alessandro. I agree with your decision. Another nodded. So do I. A third added. My company won't continue negotiations either. Within seconds, everything began collapsing. The bride looked around in panic. No. Her father grabbed his forehead. This can't be happening. One investor spoke firmly. We don't build partnerships with people who enjoy humiliating honest workers. Another added, if she'll treat an innocent waitress this way in public. He shook his head. How will she treat employees behind closed doors? The room grew heavier with every passing second. The bride finally looked at Julia. For the first time, there was fear in her eyes. You, Julia blinked. What? You planned this? Julia stared in disbelief. I've never met him before today. You're lying. Julia shook her head. I came here hoping to earn enough overtime to buy my mother's medication. Her voice trembled. I wasn't trying to become part of your wedding. Several guests lowered their heads in shame. One elderly woman quietly wiped away a tear. Julia continued. You looked at me and only saw my size. She took a shaky breath. You never asked my name. The bride opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Julia's voice became stronger. My mother taught me something when I was little. She smiled sadly. Julia, never let cruel people convince you that you're less than God's masterpiece. She looked around the ballroom. I believed the opposite for many years. Her eyes met Alessandro's. Until today. The ballroom remained silent. No applause. No music, only the weight of truth filling the room. If this story has touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes kindness is always stronger than cruelty. And tell us in the comments, if you had been a guest at this wedding, would you have spoken up for Julia? At that moment, no one realized the biggest surprise of the evening was still waiting to unfold. Julia stood quietly, still trying to process everything that had happened. Less than an hour earlier, she had been a waitress trying to earn overtime. Now an entire ballroom of powerful people was staring at her. The silence was broken by Marco. He slowly walked toward Julia, stopped a few feet away, and lowered his head. I owe you an apology. Julia looked at him without anger. You don't owe me words. Marco frowned. What do you mean? You owed me courage. The sentence hit him harder than anything Alessandro had said. Marco closed his eyes. You're right. He turned toward the guests. I saw everything. His voice shook. I watched an innocent woman being humiliated, and I stayed silent because I was afraid of ruining my wedding. He laughed bitterly. And now I realize my silence ruined something much bigger. The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Marco looked at Isabella.
I ask myself a question while standing there.
She folded her arms. What question? If this is how you treat someone who accidentally spilled champagne while saving a child. He took a slow breath. How will you treat our children when they make mistakes? Isabella's face changed. Marco, no. His voice was firmer now. You don't get to interrupt anymore. She stared at him in disbelief. You've embarrassed me. He shook his head. No, Isabella. He looked around the ballroom. You embarrassed yourself. The words echoed through the hall. Isabella turned desperately toward her father. Dad, say something. Her father sighed deeply. I spent years teaching you how to build a successful life. His shoulders slumped. I failed to teach you how to respect people. Tears formed in Isabella's eyes. So you're taking their side? I'm taking the side of what's right. She looked around the ballroom. Nobody came to defend her. Not her friends. Not her relatives. Not the guests who had laughed only minutes earlier. One by one, they lowered their eyes. An elderly woman finally stood. I need to say something. Everyone turned toward her. I laughed. Her voice trembled. I laughed when that young woman was being mocked. She looked directly at Julia. I am ashamed of myself. Julia gave her a gentle smile. It takes courage to admit that. Then another guest stood. I stayed silent. A third added, so did I. Within moments, several guests admitted they had failed Julia. The atmosphere inside the ballroom completely changed. Alessandro quietly watched. This was never about revenge. It was about awakening people's conscience. He finally stood. Listen carefully. Every voice disappeared. I didn't stand up because Julia is plus size. He looked around the room. I stood up because no human being deserves to be humiliated for showing compassion. He turned toward Julia. You protected a child without thinking about yourself. She smiled softly. I couldn't let her get hurt, and you accepted humiliation instead of blaming the child. I didn't want anyone else to suffer. Alessandro nodded. That is strength. He faced the guests again. Real strength isn't measured by money. He looked toward the politicians. It isn't measured by influence. Then toward the wealthy businessmen. It isn't measured by power. Finally, he looked at Julia. It is measured by character. The room erupted into applause, not because anyone had been forced to clap, because they finally understood. Julia covered her face as tears rolled down her cheeks. She laughed through the tears. I've never had anyone defend me before. Alessandro smiled gently. Everyone deserves someone who reminds them of their worth. A hotel employee hurried into the ballroom. Signor Moretti. Yes. The owner of the hotel is here. An elegant older gentleman entered almost immediately. The moment he saw Julia, he walked straight toward her. I owe you an apology. She blinked. Sir, I reviewed the security footage. He looked toward the manager. You fired an employee for saving a child's life. The manager began sweating. I was trying to satisfy the client. The client was wrong. He turned back to Julia. If you'll accept it, I'd like to offer you your job back. Julia smiled politely. Thank you. Everyone waited for her answer. She took a deep breath. But, no. The owner looked surprised. No, I loved working here. She smiled sadly. But I don't think I could walk these halls every day, pretending tonight never happened. The owner nodded respectfully. I understand. Alessandro looked at Julia. What would you like to do? She laughed nervously. I honestly don't know. For years, I've only thought about surviving. He reached into his jacket and handed her a simple business card. If you ever decide what your dream is, he smiled, call me. She accepted it with trembling hands. My dream? Yes. You believe I can still have one. I know you can. Weeks passed. The wedding became the biggest story in Milan, not because of the bride, not because of the mafia boss,
because millions of people were inspired by the courage of one very curvy Italian woman who refused to let cruelty define her. Giulia used Alessandro's card, not to ask for money, not to ask for favors. She asked for advice. "I've always wanted to open a bakery." Alessandro smiled. "Then let's talk about bakeries." Months later, the little bakery opened on a quiet street in Milan. The smell of fresh bread and warm pastries filled the neighborhood every morning. Giulia greeted every customer with the same kindness she had always carried in her heart. One rainy afternoon, Alessandro walked in wearing a simple black coat instead of an expensive suit. His tattoos peeked from beneath his sleeves as he smiled. "So," Giulia laughed, "so? Do you still think you don't belong at my table?" She shook her head with a smile. "No. And why not?" "Because I finally realized I never belonged beneath anyone's table." He laughed. "Exactly." She handed him a warm pastry. "This one's on the house." He reached for his wallet. "I insist." "So do I." He smiled. "You've become very stubborn." "I learned from the best." Their friendship grew naturally. There were no grand promises, no dramatic declarations, just respect, trust, shared laughter, long conversations over coffee before sunrise. Months later, Alessandro invited Giulia to a charity gala that raised money for children's hospitals across Italy. She hesitated. "I've never worn an evening gown." "You'll wear confidence." She laughed. "I don't think confidence comes in my size." He smiled warmly. "It comes in every size." The night of the gala, Giulia entered wearing a beautiful emerald green gown that celebrated her curves instead of hiding them. She wasn't pretending to be someone else. She looked like herself, confident, radiant, beautiful. Guests recognized her immediately. Many approached her. "I'm sorry. We judged you. We were wrong." Giulia accepted every sincere apology with grace. Near the end of the evening, Alessandro raised a glass. "I'd like everyone to meet the woman who reminded an entire room that dignity can never be measured by appearance." The audience stood. The applause lasted nearly a full minute. Giulia looked around the room. Months earlier, silence had surrounded her humiliation. Tonight, respect surrounded her courage. She quietly wiped away a tear. Alessandro leaned closer. "What are you thinking?" She smiled. "I'm thinking my mother was right." "What did she always tell you?" "Never let cruel people decide how valuable you are." He nodded. She was a wise woman. Giulia looked toward the crowd. "And today," she smiled through grateful tears, "I finally believe her." The narrator's voice softened. Sometimes, justice doesn't arrive with shouting. Sometimes, it arrives with one courageous person refusing to stay silent, while another human being is treated as if they matter less. If this story touched your heart, don't leave without subscribing to the channel, liking this video, and sharing it with someone who needs the reminder that kindness is never weakness. And in the comments, tell us, if you had been in that ballroom, would you have defended Giulia, or would you have stayed silent? Your answer might reveal more about your character than you think, because in the end, beauty fades, money comes and goes, power changes hands, but character is remembered long after every celebration is over. And on that unforgettable night in Italy, a feared mafia boss with tattoos covering his body didn't become the hero because of his power. He became the hero because he chose to use that power to protect someone who had none. And Giulia Bianchi, the very curvy, plus-size Italian woman so many people had underestimated, walked away with something no one could ever take from her again: her belief in her own worth. The wedding was forgotten. Her courage never was. The end.